Hello, welcome to the webinar. This is a webinar called A Journey Through Security Maturity, a Splunk webinar series. And this is part 1 of 3. This is looking at the first couple of years into security operations and how Splunk can kind of help with that. My name is Ben Marrable. I'm a senior security strategist here at Somerford Associates. Been dealing with the Splunk technology for many years now. So hopefully I can get you some insights into how Splunk can really help you in your security maturity journey. So we're just going to first have a little look at an introduction to maturity modeling, right? So everybody's throwing out maturity models, security maturity, all that sort of thing. So I just want a little bit of background into where the sort of maturity modelings come from and how security maturity really fits into that. I'll then take a look at the Splunk security data journey. Primarily, we're going to look at the couple of first stages, stages 1 and 2, and how they kind of align to what you would expect to do in the first couple of years of security operations, and how that kind of can help with the security maturity journey and all that side of things. So that should be good. And then we'll actually have a look at Splunk and how Splunk can really help with assessing your current posture and where you are, and also how it can be leveraged to improve it, really, develop better strategies, use best practices, all sorts of different things, have guides and all sorts to kind of add to it. So let's start off with the first point, right? So most security maturity models, most of those sort of step processes really kind of come from something that was developed back in 1986, which was a development model called the Capability Maturity Model. And we're going to align a lot of what we're talking about here and how this is still relevant, even though it's been improved since then, but generally the kind of foundational model is still very relevant. So it's really about taking processes from ad hoc practice right the way through to active optimization. And there are 5 levels to it, essentially, from an initial kind of point where things are disorganized. Processes are disorganized. It's very difficult to kind of standardize or do anything particularly with them. We're just very reactive, right? And then we want to start thinking about making it repeatable. So we've got a kind of a standard, but really it's just kind of, we've done this before, let's do it again in the same process. We can kind of get that kind of understanding. Once we've got that, we can actually define it, right? It is defined, it is standardized, it's repeatable, we understand it, we can keep doing it. And then it's monitored and it's controlled, and that's what we've classed as being managed. And then finally on the journey, we're going to start talking about optimizing it and improving it and continuously improving it. So this is the kind of baseline of 5 levels that we would expect to see in any maturity model, whether it's security or other. And it's all about software processing or processes in general, really. So just bear all of that in mind when we go through this kind of journey of these 3 webinars and how they kind of align to that. Okay, so we're going to start looking at the first couple of levels really here. So let's take a look at security maturity and how this is different. Well, there are a lot of different versions about security maturity out there, and they kind of all seem to share the same principle. And that really is mapping your organizations or an organization's security posture, so where they are in relation to their business requirements. Now, it's really key that it's related to the business requirements, because you could be a really mature organization in one industry, but if you were to migrate that maturity operations center to another industry, it may not be visualized as very mature. So it's really understanding what's relevant to your business and then building a security maturity direction for that and having an idea of where you sit. Now, understanding where you are in your security maturity model, right, really gives you an understanding of what cyber risks are facing the business. Okay, so defining one or using an established model that already exists gives you a prescriptive path to further maturity and enhanced security practice. So having this kind of idea of maturing your security and finding out and defining where you are on that journey can really help you get to the far end and make sure that you have the foundations in place to be able to deliver that. So that's kind of a model kind of introduction, security maturity side of things. So where do we actually start? How do we get from sort of ad hoc processes, all sorts? Well, it's all about being repeatable, right? And the key concepts that I want to get you to take away from this particular part of the series is really repeatability, okay? So figure out your key priorities. Now, these should be, at this point, identifying what your goals are, understanding what it is you're trying to do in security operations, right? Develop a strategy on how to achieve those goals, okay? Maybe that's the technology, maybe that's process, maybe that's people that need to be put in place. But you need to understand what the goals are, and then establish repeatable processes to realize them, right? So we've got the concept of it could be anything, right? It could be your goal might be to implement a logging and monitoring solution. It could be to run single sign-on, so something like Okta. It could be security awareness training for your organization. You maybe know before can help with that or something like that. But fundamentally, obviously, logging and monitoring is very key in a lot of organizations, and that's what we're really going to be talking about today. But if you can understand what your goals are, then you can kind of develop the strategy, whether that's a technology. So if we're talking about logging and monitoring, which we will be, that could be a technology like Splunk, but also making those repeatable processes is how we, get the data in, make sure the data is still coming in and continually coming in, to develop detections and make sure that they are tested, right? Repeat these processes to be able to know that it is actually working and functioning as it should be. So that's part of the strategy to realize your goals that you've defined. So all about repeatability. Now, we're going to take Splunk's viewpoint, okay? And now Splunk's viewpoint is really about the Splunk security data journey, okay? Now, this is a 6-stage process, okay? So we've gone from a 5-stage model to a 6-stage process, but this is all focused on data and the right data into a logging and monitoring solution of Splunk, and how we can kind of level that up. So we'll take a look at these stages, and in this situation, in this webinar here, we're going to talk really around again the first couple of stages, and we'll talk about the other stages a bit more detail later on. But the whole security data journey is really focused on 2 key things, right? Data collection and extracting the value from that data to realize those goals. So these are the 6 stages. So they start at collection, normalization, these 2 are the focus right now. Then we'll think about expansion, enrichment in the next one, and then we'll start thinking about automation, orchestration, and advanced detection in the final part of the series, okay? So come back for those. So as I say, we're gonna start on the first 2 things. So what do we mean by collection, okay? And what do we mean by normalization? So collection really is about establishing the right baselines to a logging and monitoring solution. So this is collecting the right data into a central logging and monitoring platform and making sure that we have the right data to be able to establish what we want to do with that logging and monitoring solution, right? Okay, so there are key data sources, which we'll talk about when we go into Splunk and the demo of Splunk itself, that are really valuable in making sure that we can hit this stage 1 well, okay? Then we want to take about repeatability, right? So this is level 2 of that capability model, okay? So understanding how we can make the process repeatable. Well, this is really about making sure that the data comes in a normalized manner. So it doesn't matter if the data is coming from a Palo firewall or a Cisco firewall, or an authentication event is coming from a Windows box or a Mac or a Linux machine, or even logging onto a firewall. All of them are normalized in the sense that the user field, for example, is always user. So if you want to have a look across all of your environment around any users, such as Ben, user equals Ben logging in, you can just search user equals Ben, okay? Tag equals authentication if you want a bit more of it. But essentially, you're just then using those same fields, having that normalized kind of process, okay? And that helps to streamline investigations. It helps to improve the effectiveness of the security team, the security operations team, making sure that they understand what they're looking for and how they can search for it, right? What we don't want to be doing is creating things such as searches or detections that don't then work on the data. So having a level of normalization, which if you're a Splunk expert, you will understand it kind of aligns to this common information model, and making sure that we've got things aligned to those out of the box using our technology add-ons that come from Splunk base. Right, so let's take a look at Splunk then. I'm going to take an understanding that the majority of you on the webinar have got an understanding of Splunk out of the box and what Splunk really is, and the fact that you have these layers of processes in Splunk, where you've got your forwarding layer, your indexing layer, and your search head layer. Now, if you're running Splunk Cloud, that indexing layer and search head layer is generally in Splunk Cloud, and your forwarding layer is where you're really getting the data from and sending it up to Splunk Cloud. Now, you can collect data from lots of different sources, and I don't really necessarily want to go into that process here, but remember that we're talking about collection of data and normalizing of data. So with any sort of data-based platform, or even if you want to go into data science, making sure that you've got the data in correctly is really key. So curation of that data is really important. So the data onboarding process is really important to as a foundational platform to all of what you want to do in terms of security, and leveling up your security maturity, right? Get those foundations in right, get the data in correctly, then that can make life a lot easier, and it will kind of make sense as I go through this one. So where I've come here is essentially into what's called Splunk Security Essentials. Some of you may know about it, but it's essentially an application that gives you a collection of content to deploy on top of that data that's come in, right? So once we've collected data and we've normalized it and we understand it, then we can create data for it. We can create content for it, sorry. So I'm going to originally start off under documentation and under security data journey, right? And that's going to take me to this page, which you'll recognize from the slides. This is the security data journey mapped within Splunk Security Essentials, and how you can kind of use Splunk Security Essentials aligned to this data journey, right? Now, some of the key things that you can get out of here is really what we expect to see from this stage. Okay, so we've got a description, we've got milestones or a few milestones of what we expect to get to, and any challenges that we foresee in delivering this particular stage. And also very key at the bottom here is the data sources that are going to be relevant to this stage, right? So making sure, right, you could bring in every data source under the sun, but that's going to be quite expensive and quite time consuming before realizing any value. So making sure you have the highest value data into your logging and monitoring solution is really key. So these are things like your firewall traffic logs, your endpoint logs, whether those are servers or endpoints themselves, security logs from those, so we know who's logging onto them, who's doing what on them. Your central authentication logs, right? So Active Directory or identity and access management, whether it's Okta or something else, single sign-on tools, and also web activity, right? So web proxies, email proxies, those are kind of key things to get started with in security, right? And making sure that we got the right security data sources in to provide the most valuable content and deliver the most out of your logging and monitoring solution, right? So this stage is all the collection, and then when we move to normalization, the milestones change, the challenges change, the data sources aren't so relevant. It's really about making sure the data maps to the common information model, and this really improves performance and the ability to do more with your security operations and your logging and monitoring solution, right? So these two stages combined are about getting the right data and making sure it's in the right format. And this is your focus. This should be your focus for the first couple of years. If you've got all of that, then what you can start doing is start leveraging what is in Splunk Security Essentials and applications that come out of Splunk base ready to use these normalized data, this data that's expected to be in the right format. So where we would first go in Splunk Security Essentials is security content drop down here. And this will take us to this viewpoint. Now, this viewpoint can be looked at as a big collection of library. All of these boxes essentially are a different use case that you could be doing with the data that you've collected, things that you want to make repeatable, right? We use that word again. So we've got the first and two stages here of what we want, so that we can map. They're mapped again here within that data journey, so you can filter based on that sort of steps. And as you see, all of these are kind of inside square boxes or rectangular boxes technically, and they have a title and they have a description, and then they have a couple of sort of bubbles down the bottom about different sort of different sort of tagging, should we say, to it. So this one, for example, is classed as being featured. That means it's highly recommended by Splunk Security SMEs. So it's very common, it's very useful across most industries. There are ones that are not featured. That doesn't mean it's not valuable to you, or just generally, it just means that it's less focused. It's more focused to specific areas or specific use cases. So you can look at them both ways. And then we've got search include. That means it will run with Splunk, and these are the kind of key things that you want to be looking at. And generally, most of the stuff in level 1 should be searches included. And if we were to just click on any of these, then we'll get a lot more details around it. So let's click at authentication against a new domain controller. So this might be someone's added a new domain controller into the network and something's kind of changed that maybe, or they've moved their device and they're connecting to a strange one that they wouldn't normally connect to, that sort of thing. But you can see the MITRE tactics, the MITRE techniques that could be relevant to this. You can see the kill chain phases. You get all this kind of extra information around this use case. You've got alert volumes, you've got the SPL difficulty, because one of the key things about having this content at your fingertips is really getting an idea of how to write the actual search syntax as well, right? So we're not all Splunk ninjas, we don't know all the search syntax. So being able to use this to kind of learn something, and I'll show you really how you can do that in a moment, is really useful. You also have the security impact that we're going to see from it, right? So we've got some very good stuff telling us about what we've got. We can also see that we actually have data for this, which is great. That means we can use it, right? And you can filter that previous screen on the data as well if you wanted to, and say, you know, I have data, I don't have data. If you scroll down, you can see the search itself and how it's constructed. And then you can also click on this button called line by line SPL documentation, and this will give you an understanding of what all of these sort of steps actually mean and do, right? And they've got kind of comments for each individual line. And this is really how you can learn about the process of building these searches, and how you can kind of level up your SPL skills during this process as well, which is great. You also have things like how to respond, how to implement any known false positives. You can expand on these and get an idea of what you would expect to see. So you've got not only searches, but in here you've also got understanding around the use case as a wider piece, as a wider picture, which is really, really good. And because you've got that content in and you've got it normalized, the data in, you know, you've collected it, and you can see that you've got, this is going to be valuable to you, which is great. Now, another piece, and I'm not going to spend too long on Splunk Security Essentials here because there's a lot in here. Do come along to a webinar specifically targeted on that product. Yeah, the other thing I want to just look at is the content overview, and this can be found in the Analytics Advisor under Content Overview. And if I come over to this screen, what you're going to see is the content mapped for everything, right? So we've got data for 412 use cases. In this case, we haven't got anything actively in this environment running, but we need data for 150 other ones, right? But we have a massive amount of data use cases that we can leverage based on the data that we have, which is really key. And if you're just learning about Security Essentials, you will need to do the data inventory to get this viewpoint, tell it what data you've got. But it's a really good way of kind of understanding what is available to you. Maybe you've got specific use case areas that you are of interest to, you know, what data is relevant to you, or data sources, and whatever method you want to use to kind of get and extract value out of the technology. This can be really helpful as getting you leveling up on that security maturity model and having detections in certain areas. And if it was that you wanted to look in a MITRE viewpoint or a cyber kill chain viewpoint, you have there in Splunk Security Essentials viewpoints for that as well, which maybe I'll talk about in the next webinar in the series. So we've got all of that, we understand it, right? We've got our data in, we're repeating it, we've got use cases that we can start using, we've enabled them, that makes the repeatability, they're regularly running, and we can start detecting on things. So that's great. Now, we can also just get things out of the box, right? So one of the key use case applications that you can get out of the box from, you know, through the base Splunk, Splunk Cloud, Splunk Enterprise, or what we call Splunk Core essentially, is called an app called InfoSec. And this is a really good starting point to security via logging and monitoring, right? Having a central logging and monitoring environment with those key data sources that you were bringing in. I didn't mention malware before in that previous one, but I would also add malware into that as well. Make sure that we get malware data in too. So as a first point of this, we have what's known as a security posture page, which is really kind of a viewpoint of where we are. So very much about security maturity, like how are we doing, how many accounts have we got monitored, how many hosted devices are reporting in, you know, is this progressing from day to day? These are really key things. What are the top intrusion alerts? What are the top sort of high severity alerts that we're seeing? You know, so we've got some understanding of kind of mapping where we're at, and also centralized viewpoints and so forth. right? And of course, this is your day-to-day analyst view, but if you wanted to have a look from maybe a higher point, your executive view, and you just want those high-level stats, you can go ahead and do that as well. So, number of attacks stopped, malware blocked today, users protected. Now, this environment's only been up for a day, so these numbers are excessively increased. But what you will see is, different ways of viewing the same data, really. Because it's all in one place, you can present it in different ways to different teams, different people that want to see it in a different viewpoint, and what is valuable to them, really. So I'll come back to security posture, and then I'll just show you a few things in InfoSec. But again, this is really about learning the maturity models and kind of how you can map it to the maturity and how that security data journey really kind of aligns to it. So I'll talk on continuous monitoring. There are a number of different things that come out of the box for this, right? Based on all of those data sources that you've collected from that first level of that security data journey, right? So we're talking Windows access and changes, authentication, malware, IDS, firewalls, network traffic, VPN access, right? And if I come into one of them, it will give you a kind of a high level view of organizational authentication events, right? So we've got failed authentications, successful authentications, all of that side of things. As a high level holistic viewpoint of what's going on in the environment. And there are lots of different graphics in here, including this one, which will show you if you hover over anything where they've been connecting or anything else that's been connecting to them, so you can see those two users are connected to this device is connected to another device, all that sort of thing as well. So red's being users, blue being computers. And you get these sort of different graphics that are, everything I'm showing you here is out of the box, right? You power the data, you bring the data in as a collection, you normalize it to make sure it's in the sort of format that all these dashboards expect, and then they will just work, okay? And that normalization process is quite straightforward. It's using the technology add-ons that are in there for each of the technologies as well, right? So really, really useful. We can also think about advanced threats. So, bit more kind of interesting use cases such as access anomalies, network anomalies. So if I come into access anomalies, we can see the number of hosts accessed, the brute force attack by source, brute force attacks by users. We've got actual anomalies. So someone's logged in from Germany and then they've logged in from Japan. That's kind of very, very fast speed. They're going to be going at 1,600 miles per hour to actually be able to achieve that. That's what we call the Superman user. So some very interesting kind of insights based on just authentication logs, right? And we got graphical and maps based on that as well. So again, lots of different viewpoints, lots of different colors, which is great, which is thresholding and all that sort of things that are going on. There's also dashboards on compliance, so it kind of gets you an idea of what would be compliant. Let's have a look at them while we're here, right? So we can see, the number of accounts that are monitored. We can see distinct user logons by host, boundary defense. So you've got different areas, different particular types of compliance statements that these sort of areas sit. So it's a nice big dashboard with lots of different things in here. Any malware defenses, NIST compliance standards that we'd expect to see, PCI DSS, HIPAA, whatever it is. And this is just the starting point of how you can get kind of compliance reporting into place with the data that you're bringing in for one thing, right? Security use cases. You can also get compliance out of it as well. The other thing I just want to kind of touch in is user investigation, host investigation. So once you've seen a user account or a host that you want to be kind of going into a bit more detail about, you can come in here, you can specify that particular host or user, hit it in wildcards if you like to over the last 24 hours or something. Maybe we want to look for admin, for example, and I put a wildcard in, hit enter, last 24 hours, what's admin been up to? You can see they're in these sort of different areas, right? Different use cases. So not too many events, but you can see they're down here, pan traps being seen them and stuff, which is really good. Right, I think that's all I want to show you today. Do come along to the next webinar, right, where we are going to talk about leveling up into level 3 and level 4, which will be really, really, really interesting. We're going to talk, if we talk about it from the capability maturity model, that will be defined and managed from a security data journey. That's going to be the sort of expansion and enrichment processes, but it's also going to be a little look at Splunk's enterprise security solution and kind of taking where we left off here from InfoSec app to that next level. Other than that, thank you very much for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day.